central story is the child's at the center of this. If the child's at the center, we need to understand the child, therefore there has to be education. And it's not just coach education, it's the education of how players develop and how children develop and how you should engage with them. Anybody who's coaching should really be child-centered, player-centered. And I probably use those two terms purposely, that it's child-centered, then player-centered. And if you're child-centered first, player-centered second, you then start to think about, well, why am I doing this, coaching this way, using these behaviors for a group of 6-year-olds? Should I change that for a group of 10-year-olds? What's happening in an 11-year-old boy and girl's life at 13, 14? That means as a coach, I have to adapt. And then the environment around me and the people that are working around me, what do they need to do to adapt to those age groups, rather than saying one size fits all? And I think what we have is, and have had for a long time, is one size fits all. We look and see what's happening at the Premier League, MLS, and then we try to just change that, adapt it slightly maybe, and deliver it for kids. Or in some cases, we see what's happening at the top level and we try to deliver it to kids. So rather than independently say it's somebody else's fault, if we're all involved in football, it's our own collective responsibility to try and fix it.
Hello, coaches. Welcome back to another Modern Soccer Coach podcast. This week, we are zooming out. Development is more than coaching sessions. It's more than a curriculum. It's more than what happens on a Tuesday night. And it's definitely more than your league position. Technical leadership today is evolving way beyond the pitch. It's about understanding development. It's about environment, and it's about infrastructure. And that is what we are going to talk about today. Dr. Kyle Ferguson has spent the last 18 months reviewing youth football systems and is asking a bigger question. Are we truly building around the child, or are we building around adult agendas? He's done a full study on this here. I will put the link below. I read the review before the interview and wanted to get him on immediately. Love this conversation. It's so powerful, and I think it's really going to challenge how we view youth development and hopefully start more conversations in real holistic picture around development and stretch our thinking in this regard. Massive thanks to Dr. Kyle for jumping on. Please make sure you like, please make sure you subscribe, please check out his work on the link below. And I'll also put some youth soccer resources there below if you want to check them out as well. Thanks so much for all your support. Here he is. Enjoy. Dr. Kyle Ferguson, thank you so much for joining me today on the Modern Soccer Coach podcast. Really, really excited to chat.
Thanks, Gary. Appreciate you asking me on.
I'm really looking forward to this. We had a quick chat off air. I read the study, and some of it, wasn't groundbreaking news, but a lot of it is alignment and focus and awareness. But I want to start before that. I want to start before the study on what was the area. Was it youth sports in particular that you saw an issue going into study, or was it the Northern Ireland infrastructure, bit of both, or what was the inspiration?
Yeah, I think my background's more in sport policy, as well as, I do a lot of video analysis, data analytics. So when you bring it together, from my perspective, it was how can policy and practice actually intertwine in this case to create some evidence. I think on the ground, when we were looking at youth football in Northern Ireland and talking to other countries globally, they were saying same issues for us. When we started to talk about other sports, it was same issues. It's around, the game itself and how it's played at different levels. It's adapted to different sizes, different number of teams, players, but then the environment around it and issues that are created with touchline behavior, stress, pressure on players, the governance of pressure in clubs and the standards that are expected, and then the education that's needed for players and for coaches. So when you put it all together, it was the same issues in youth sport. It was just a case of saying, well, how do we contextualize it to our environment? We take into account what's happening globally. We take into account what happens in Northern Ireland, and then there's maybe a few tweaks here and there. But actually, overall, globally, it's the same issues. The majority of them, if you take the 80-20 rule, 80% of those issues were the same.
You describe early on in the study, you describe football as a complex, dynamic system. What do you think people underestimate when you look at that complexity?
I think it's the how-to skills. It's one of those things, have you ever seen that hazard phase of education where you start off and you don't know a lot, and then you get a little bit of information and suddenly you think you know everything, and that's a real hazard. And when you go through that and you get to the next phase, you understand what you don't know, and you think you don't know a lot, but actually you appreciate what's around you. So at that stage, we're really looking at, well, everybody looks at what they deliver, and will probably, from an education point of view, go and look at what somebody else is delivering on the pitch, even in a coaching point of view, and try to replicate it without really thinking about the how-to skills of how to engage, without thinking about the why and the purpose. So when we put this together, we said anybody who's coaching should really be child-centered, player-centered. I probably use those two terms purposely, that it's child-centered, then player-centered. And if you're child-centered first, player-centered second, you then start to think about, well, why am I doing this, coaching this way, using these behaviors for a group of 6-year-olds? Should I change that for a group of 10-year-olds? What's happening in an 11-year-old boy and girl's life at 13, 14? That means as a coach, I have to adapt. And then the environment around me and the people that are working around me, what do they need to do to adapt to those age groups, rather than saying one size fits all? And I think what we have is, and have had for a long time, is one size fits all. We look and see what's happening at the Premier League, MLS, and then we try to just change that, adapt it slightly, maybe, and deliver it for kids. Or in some cases, we see what's happening at the top level and we try to deliver it to kids.
Yeah. I mean, I think you've just nailed the biggest problem. What did you call the hazardous? I haven't heard that before. With today's, it's almost a false sense of security around information where, like, yeah, we're in the Google Chat GPT era, but like with football thinking and football leadership, I don't think we go. I think we go into the second stage and think that we can address problems, and we don't go into the level of humility that, as you go further deeper into this, you do uncover. I mean, that's difficult complexity. I wonder if that's a society thing that coaches get caught up in or leaders get caught up in.
Yeah, and I think sometimes because football's seen as, we all know the rules. They're quite simple, the rules, in many ways, until you get into the real depth. But I can go out and deliver a football session, and most people will sit in the sideline and think they can deliver a football session. Maybe other sports like hockey, for example, there's more complexity to it. Judo, there's more complexity to it. And if you, it's the man on the street or the woman on the street's not really thinking, I know what's going on in judo. When I watch rugby, I'm not too clear about why a free kick's been given. When I watch football, I've got my opinion whether it's right or wrong. Therefore, I can go onto the pitch and give my opinion as a coach or a parent.
Yeah, and I would argue, and this is coming from a coaching perspective, a lot of coaches actually are more engaged when it comes to complexity because I think that's why data and tactical systems. I think if you say, listen, go out and run the training. I had a talk with coach yesterday, and their thing was, if you just if a coach just went out on the grass and tried to make the team a little bit better in one specific area, you can't underestimate how powerful that would be. But I think today is that everyone's looking for the 1%. They're leaving 50 to 60% uncovered.
Yeah, you're right. And we've done a lot of analysis of matches, but we also do coach behavior analysis where we tag a coach, and there's 20 or 30 different behaviors they'll use while they're coaching. Things like they'll demonstrate, they'll question and answer, they'll give praise, they'll hustle the team. So you can tag that and say, what behaviors is that coach using? And then you start to think, well, in my curriculum, what should a coach be doing? So at that 6 to 8-year-old, it should be about encouragement. It should be about praise. But then when they get to the next stage group, it should be about praise with a purpose, where they're starting to praise the player towards what the purpose of the night's session was. They maybe don't use hustle as much at a 13, 14-year-old because there's an expectation of a minimum standard. Therefore, you don't just praise them for turning up, and you don't just praise them for doing something well. It has to be a real purpose. So if you work that through the system, you want to try and collaborate the education and your curriculum with how the coach is actually delivering it.
As with all research studies, it can be quite academic to read, especially for someone like me. It's used to skimming through some things, and I'm sure a lot of coaches are the same. Talk about, or if you could summarize this, the central message, the spine of the research. I mean, what would you say as you go into? I still want people to read it, and we'll put all the links below, so I don't ruin it for them. But like, where does it go?
Yeah, to me, the central story is the child's at the center of this. If the child's at the center, we need to understand the child. Therefore, there has to be education. And it's not just coach education, it's the education of how players develop and how children develop and how you should engage with them. Then on the outside, it's the rules. Well, our rules have to be not one size fits all. The governance has to be rules that suit the children at that time. Then, if you take it a stage further and say, well, the environment around the game, the touchline behavior and everything that goes around inside that, it has to be relevant and appropriate for that age group and the people we're working with, and the actual game itself has to suit that age group. So if we're looking at player centered, we're no longer saying, from a governance point of view, we've got 40 games this weekend and they have to be played. They have to be played at the right format for the right age group. So now we're able to go back in the measurement of this and say the data has told us this is the right thing to do. We then engage the local level to work out this is what can be done. So one of the measurements, for example, is what percentage of kids after a year in Northern Ireland are playing age appropriate games? Well, in 1 year, it's went from 60 odd percent to 80 odd percent. So we've already had a 20% jump in what we now believe are kids who are playing the right format for their age group. So that's what we want to do going forward is everything has to be measured back to what's right for the kids.
Brilliant, brilliant. You identify four interlocking pillars: governance, education, active game, environment. The governance one, I look at that. And this is just a personal opinion, but I wonder if that's difficult because of they're not necessarily coaches, and some of them are boards, and some of them are. Is that Are you talking about, or can you give a little bit of detail about what that extends to? Is that a U.S. soccer IFA, or is that local governance, or what's that? What does that cover?
Yeah, I mean, it should run through everything in terms of rules, regulations, and the formats offered. So if I sat in a room with a number of experts in governance and said, how do we measure governance? How do we measure the effectiveness of this? And one simple thing came back. Governance is about putting on appropriate games. So if we said at the weekend there was meant to be 1,000 kids football matches played across the country and 800 happened, well, now we should go back to why did the 200 not happen? Was it because of a lack of referees? Was it because the pitches weren't available? Was it because the teams were folding? Or was it because there was an issue with the weather in some way? And then we can say, well, where do we need to put our investment in the future? If it's a lack of referees, we need to train more referees to be available. If it's a lack of pitches, we need to invest in pitches. But we don't know why the games are happening or not happening. And then when you combine that and say, well, what percentage are age appropriate for what we're saying in the right pitches on the right equipment, then we can say again, we have a lack of investment or we have a need for investment in certain areas. If we're doing that regionally, we can see where the games are at, which are not working because they're not appropriately set up, or they are working and there's good practice to share. And then it becomes a situation of saying it isn't just about putting the games on, it's about making sure that the right environment is created on those games. So it's not governance by itself, it's governance now alongside environment, alongside where do we invest and educate.
It's fascinating. I think culturally, governance in the US, we blame governance of US soccer for actually the progress of national teams, which I mean, yeah, get your thoughts on this. I think that's an inaccurate accountability of like whether we can win a World Cup, whether that's actually good governments or not. And but then I go back to my upbringing in Northern Ireland, and I didn't see or hear a lot of criticism around governance towards the game. It was more part time, or not even volunteers looking after it. The people were happy that they were getting involved. You give a good. I don't repeat the question. You give a really good assessment of what governance covers, but I guess do we get that inaccurate from a coaching standpoint or from a parent standpoint about what they should be responsible for?
Do you know what? I think there's an education piece there, and I do a lot of work around board governance and effective governance. And the thing I keep coming back to is saying to people, well, if you're involved in football, there's a collective responsibility. As an individual coach, you have a collective responsibility to your team. As an individual coach, you have a collective responsibility to your club. That club is within a league. That league's within a governance structure for a national association. So those people who say, I'm fine, but it's the club's fault. I'm fine, but it's the league's fault. I'm fine, but it's the national association's point. Their problem. We need to get to the point where it's collective responsibility and they've all got a voice. So rather than independently say it's somebody else's fault, if we're all involved in football, it's our own collective responsibility to try and fix it.
Oh, here we go. Here we go. Does the commercialization component then start to make that difficult when we're working in the best interests of the game? And then all of a sudden the business model come in. And again, it is prominent in America, but I think it's also UK. It's coming into to play as well, where there is a commercial interest of player development, the teams, the tours, and all that stuff. Does that blur the lines or make it more difficult for people?
Yeah, you're totally right. I mean, I would look at it and say that what I've just described is a bottom up approach, but there's then the top down. And if you take that ripple effect model, if I do something, there's going to be a ripple effect. And if that's at an individual level to a club, to a community, to a league, to a national association, well, then that ripple hits the end and comes back, just like dropping it into a stream. The ripple goes to the shore and then it comes back out again. So there's got to be two and three-way communication there. And if we're always saying that this should be for the benefit of the individual child and there's an element of ethics behind it, well, that commercialism has to have a balance with ethics and it can't go one, too far either way. We can say from a sociology point of view, ethical point of view, this is what would be black and white, but we always operate in the gray. So therefore, it's what's the best for the child at that point, knowing that at some stages we can't operate without money, we can't operate without the commercialism, but at the same stage, we have to keep referring back to what's best for the child if that's the whole purpose. Or you could rip it up and start again and say we want to be a money making machine and football is just a byproduct.
Hello, coaches. We will take a quick break here. As always, I appreciate all the support for Modern Soccer Coach over the last few months. We've grown the YouTube channel. We have also extended our resources into youth football, more conversations around youth football. Stay posted. We've got some massive interviews coming around youth football, not just youth sessions, but also technical leadership. What does it really look like when you are managing coaches, when you are trying to look at a long term lens, when you are living in a world where there's so much pressure on the short term? So, we're really enjoying building out the youth programming at Modern Soccer Coach. If you're a youth leader, if you're a youth coach, please make sure you like, please make sure you subscribe. Massive part of the algorithm, as we're finding, is that the more likes and the more subscriptions, the more the content will go out to more coaches. So please do your bit and make sure you give it a like, write a comment. Some form of interaction again picks up in the algorithm, and all of a sudden the conversation starts to grow. So that's what we're looking at doing. Also, if you're looking at some session ideas around youth development, yes, this conversation goes beyond that, but sessions are also important. And if you want some ideas, please check out the new ebooks on Modern Soccer Coach, modernsoccercoach.com/shop. We've got special offers on them, and they're also available on the Insider as part of the deal there. So plenty going on a Modern Soccer Coach. Of course, we're going to look at analysis. Of course, we're going to look at Elite 11v11, tactical systems as well. But we're also going to move into youth methodology, technical leadership, and see what that looks like. More of a long-term lens on the game, and hopefully get the best in the business around to talk about it. So again, massive thanks for all the support. Again, please make sure you like, and please make sure you send it on to your coaching community. Back to Dr. Kyle. Thanks again. Yeah. I mean, I just listened to Jonathan Wilson on a podcast earlier talking about whether, football, again, the commercialization and World Cup ticket prices, and whether, the value of something is what someone is willing to pay for it. Of course, you learn that over here, and I've got a marketing degree from over here, so you learn that fairly quickly. But then you've also got the responsibility of the game, and I do worry slightly about where that goes in, almost like who challenges that, because sometimes it's difficult like you mentioned, top down, bottom up. Sometimes it's difficult to challenge bottom up, And I think a lot of people feel that they challenge that online today, but in reality, that's probably not. I don't think that's a really healthy way of doing it. I mean, what would you suggest of challenging or checking or keeping people in a good spot with this?
Well, that's the separation of power, and I guess football's set up with a separation of power built in, where you've got UEFA, FIFA, and you've got the independent national associations. Then you've got the IFAB board who set the rules and regulations. So there's already a separation of power there to some extent. It's about who holds the power, and at the moment, I think we'd all agree in world society, money talks, and therefore there is an element that money will always influence the game. It's about having a minimum standard and making sure like these are things that are non-negotiable in the game. But then does that money go to somewhere else? So, for example, if football were really strict and put a line in the sand that says our commercialism won't go beyond this, does that money then go to another sport and leave football behind?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, especially in today's world of it's not even what have you done for me today. It's what clicks are people getting every like I'm watching my kids and how they consume entertainment today, and they're fascinated by commercials, ads, because they've never seen them before. And it just seems today is about engagement of keeping that next generation. How are they going to be engaged in something on a screen? When you're looking at um the game will take different formats, and then you're looking at again like I do find it interesting. I do find it interesting where is there enough in the game that I once thought I still do think the game is a pure is pure entertainment. I don't see that there needs to be razzmatazz content going way outside it, but I guess that's old man talking here.
Well, the thing is, when we were writing that article, it was we need to measure success. So if you look at it and say you're a stakeholder in football, what is success to you? And the model we were using was three quick, simple questions from outcomes based accountability. And that's from like Friedman's work, and it started in America actually. And the first question is, what do we do? The second is, how well do we do it? And the third is, what impacts it making, or is anyone better off? Well, if you're asking those questions from a commercial point of view, you'll probably have a very different answer to somebody who's asking it from a football development point of view, somebody else who's asking it from a performance point of view. And if you're then in governance, your viewpoint of what success is very different to the coaches who's looking after the active game, who then might have a different viewpoint of success for the coach educators. So all of that needs to come together to some common purpose while accepting that people have their own agendas.
Let's talk about education and the study. Again, it's one of the pillars. How do you see education from, I guess, from a youth standpoint? I mean, do you think we're on the right track with it? Do you think it needs to go deeper into the psychological, the context specific levels, or what's your thoughts on that there around the world?
I think one of the issues is how reliant we are on volunteers for a start at the youth level. So if we're reliant on volunteers, there's an expectation of what's reality and what's expectation there. So what would we ask of a volunteer coach? And then you could say, well, what would we ask of our professional coach? And then the question I ask quite regularly is, what would I ask of my swimming coach? Would I let my child go to a volunteer swimming coach who hasn't got any real experience of swimming because there's a danger and there's a risk there? But when we come to football, we need to have those real thoughts of what's the expectation, because we've seen a real drop off in football, and we can see it in the stats and the data. We have a drop off for those kids who have just started because they have a bad experience. We have a drop off of kids around 11, 12 because they're moving from primary school to secondary school and the game becomes more competitive. And then you have a drop off again of sort of 16, 17-year olds because we move from youth to senior football. Now, that's by no accident that those drop offs are happening if we don't have the right educated coaches who understand how youth development happens, how kids grow, and how they interact with them. But at the same stage, then you balance that by saying, if we don't have all the volunteer coaches, we don't have capacity. So therefore, we don't have the opportunities. So there's definitely a balancing act to have.
Yeah, I actually just went through my first experience with kind of youth level with my kids. I have a 7-year old and went through it this year, and it was purely volunteer. You know, it was all in the right spirit. But my wife was about to punch me. You know, I was sitting there observing it from a football standpoint. I'm saying like he'll want to quit after this. And it's not the fact that he was being yelled at or that it was in that tone or anything. It was all friendly. It was all good, but it was so controlled. It was many professional. You stand there, you stand there, you stand there, you do this constant, constant, constant. And it made me think about the fact that we do need more education around actually probably what a coach is. Education is about order or structure, otherwise the classroom goes. But in coaching, especially at that kid, 7, 8 year old, you need to be comfortable in the the class doing all different things and you kind of embracing that. And if I was thinking that, and I have 20 odd experience of coaching, I think we probably do have we need a responsibility for how we get that information to volunteers who don't have time to go on weekend courses.
Yeah, to me, it was a case of saying we can go on a course to teach you how to do football drills. And a lot of associations do that. But actually, it's a fundamental movement, it's physical literacy, it's the physical activity. So I've taught my daughter's team for a few years. She's now 12. And it's probably alongside doing the research to this. I got more knowledge and understanding by coaching her team from under 8 to under 12. So by writing the actual theoretical part of this, I'm also experiencing that in the sideline and thinking about, well, how do I talk to a 12-year-old girl? How do I talk to a 10-year-old girl? I'm a dad. I know what she's going through. I know what she'll like and what she won't like. But now I've got 15 different girls who are very, a variety of different abilities, but also a variety of different stages of development. So now we need to really understand development, fundamental movement. You then have a variety of people who are at a performance level, people who are just starting off. Well, how do you integrate them together? And how do you make that happen? And I remember having a conversation recently, and it was one of the guys from FIFA who had been working, Callum Irvine, on pieces behind the scenes for the last World Cup. And one of the statistics we looked at was if you play football in the World Cup and you hit longer passes, probably about a 20 odd percent chance of winning the game. If you take the ball under pressure, you've got a 68% chance of winning the game if you do that more than the opposition. And then you go back to take that into a kids level and say, do you want my team to play it from the back and take it under pressure? Because long term, that will help them, but I might lose that game. So then I need my parents to understand we're going to lose games because we're going to make mistakes. I need the players to understand you will make mistakes, which might concede goals, but I'm not shouting at you. I'm encouraging you. Then I'm looking at the training session and saying, well, there's a player who you could have passed to on the right hand side who's free. There's a player in front of you who's marked. Generally, most players, people say, pass to the player who's free. But that's not doing you any good because you need to be able to receive the ball under pressure. So why not do that in training? Why not concede goals in a match by playing out and playing under pressure or playing off your left foot instead of your right and switching players over? If we can get to that point where we totally forget about matches, I see a lot of coaches I talk to who say, I'm a development coach. And in training, their training's fantastic, but when it comes to a match, it's like, no, don't play that ball under pressure, which then takes away the whole point of the players knowing and thinking this is about my development.
Yes, I posted a quote. It's like a bear camp quote about how like up until 14, it doesn't matter about results. It's about learning the game, falling in love with it. And I would have thought that it would, like 5 people click or 5 people like it, and oh, this is great. It had like 500 likes, but it had about 50 comments disagreeing with Bear Camp. And usually like I wouldn't read this thing, but actually this morning I had a coffee and I was sitting reading them. I'm like, oh my god, you've people they're saying, well, yeah, this is just a fairy tale. Ajax youth teams win. Someone wrote that. Someone else wrote, yeah, this doesn't apply. If I don't win games with my high school team, the kids aren't happy. And I always felt I thought we were way beyond the results versus development argument to where I thought this is a redundant post. But I actually feels like after reading a lot of those responses, I was thinking, actually looks I think we're getting worse. I think we're actually saying that we're now trying to convince ourselves that it's actually, well, I got to keep up, you know. Would take a lot to make me shake my head these days at some of these comments, but I'll shake my head with it.
Yeah. And that, I mean, you get that regularly and ask somebody, are you development or are you about winning? And everybody's about development. And then when you ask for examples or you go and watch, like that's not development. That's not going to help. Or I'm player centered. And then you see them being very autocratic in their coaching. I'm player centered, but then you're shouting at your players, telling them what to do as opposed to getting some information from them and helping them learn for themselves.
Yeah, yeah. Perfect. Right. I don't want to go down a Gary Rant road. Stay on track. Um, Parent education. This one fascinates me. Um, what should parent education look like? How important is it? Where should it be aligned?
Do you know that this is one that I think we're still struggling with because parent education in South Carolina is going to be very different to parent education in California, for example. Different demographics, different society. Similar in Northern Ireland, we within a small, you'll know better than most, a small geographical area have so many different social differences. So therefore, we need to look at, well, what's the expectations on parents? What are the expectation of a parent going to a club? What are the expectations from the parent onto their player? So that triangle between the coach, the parent, and the player, it's about educating there so that realities and expectations are the same, but taking into account the context. So I don't think we'll ever get to the point where we can deliver parent education across the world and say this is one size fits all again. Society dictates there's local issues and local context that we have to take account of, but it is about some of the parents understanding their role as a parent. What is their role? And actually, there's so many unintended consequences. So if a parent is constantly at the side telling their kid what to do, and it might come from a really good place where they're trying to help them, they don't want their child to fail. But actually, it's about educating a parent to say it's okay for a child to make a mistake. It's okay for the child to fail. It's then about how they know the environment around them supportive so that they can build resilience. You'll never go onto a sports field and not make a mistake. Therefore, you can't try to solve your child's problems for them. Similarly, the coach can't solve the child's problems for them. If they keep making a similar mistake, then we can deal with that and work on it. But a parent can't solve a child's problems for them. Certainly, if the environment's right around the pitch, then the education will have worked, but we can't have one parent then setting another parent off where just because one person's out of order, everyone else jumps in. We actually want to get self-policing to some extent where the expectation and the standard is we all are there to support everyone on the pitch. And if somebody steps out of line, then nobody else follows suit. They all realize that's the wrong thing to do. Somebody then can have a word about it.
Yeah, it's tricky. When I grew up, there wouldn't have been two. We need the parent that took you to the game. You know what I'm going to say? The parent that took you to the game, and the one more for a car, not even helping out. Whereas in America, again, we have a reputation, and the parent is it's almost the co-experience, parent and player. Uh, has that? It obviously has changed in Northern Ireland and the UK now. The parent is taking more of a role. I mean, how do you view that all as being um and not negative? I don't want to use was it is it good or bad, but I mean, what good comes with that, or how should that be channeled in a positive way?
It's almost, I think, like education. I have two kids that are under the age of 12 now, and it's very different to what I remember education. Whereas the teachers are sending work home and saying this is for the parent to help the child. So you're now part of their education. They'll send you videos to say, look, we're going to do some basic numbers. Can you do this and use this way, this solution for your children and talk it through? So it's great that education, I realize that a parent can be a great influencer on helping to read or helping to do basic maths. Similarly, if I have a child and I'm coaching them 2 hours a week, well, they might be potentially in the back garden with their mum or dad or granny or granda, and they could really help their development. They could then increase their physical activity. They could improve the relationship between, parent and child or grandparent and child. So there's a real ability to use sport for good. If you go back then to COVID times, a number of leagues I've talked to said it was great because parents couldn't come there was no issues because parents weren't there. So it's not about excluding them. It's about encouraging them to understand how they can be part of it, but also the education of what definitely not to do. Because even though it might not have a negative influence on your child, it might really affect somebody else in that pitch. Might really affect somebody else in that pitch.
Yeah, yeah, it's tough. Like you mentioned there before about kind of parents holding parents accountable. Um, I've never seen that happen. Um, uh, and I wonder, is that a cultural thing or is that, what I do see, and I watch a ton of games, youth games, alongside parents, not my kids' games, but traveling around the country watching games. And I do see, like, I hear discussions on the sideline, and some of them are like leading comments that is going to get piggybacked upon about, oh, yeah, that was a strange substitution. And I also heard, I was at a college game and I heard parents again, little cozy group all together talking. And it was the first time I heard parents talk in football lingo, coaching lingo, as in the pressing's off or too many transfer. I'm thinking, oh, well, what are we doing here? I guess, what's your advice to, I mean, I think a lot of clubs want to educate the parents, but they don't necessarily want them as experts in football. How on earth do you get that balance right?
Yeah, that is the problem. Once you engage, it's a level of engagement, just like a player. And it is just like a player. If we did video analysis with a 12-year-old and threw everything at them, it's overload. But it is about layering. And I think one thing we don't do at a young age in youth development and football development is engage the parent to understand. Look, at 6 and 7, it's about having fun. At 8 and 9, it's about understanding the technical movement. And 10, 11 is about understanding the game a little bit. 12, 13 is about the physical demands. And we're starting to, this is the purpose. So, if, like what I try to do with our team is say, here's the two priorities that we want our team this year. That's our key focus. And then there'll be individual things for players after that. But it's about getting the buy-in from the parents to say, like, we will lose games. We will have situations during this year which don't go to plan. But this is the whole purpose. What we're looking to achieve, rather than looking at one particular point, we're looking at it over a period of time and saying, do you think 6 months ago we achieved what we said we would of developing your child's ability to take the ball in the back foot and change direction? That they can take the ball in the left foot or the right foot, that they can use the ball when it comes to them to automatically change the direction of the ball. Do they now understand the game a little bit more? So don't get hung up on the outputs. Get focused on what the outcome is of a bigger picture.
Your research highlights friendships, fun, social connections as the key drivers of engagement for kids. Um, and obviously, these are undervalued. That's not the question. The question is, do we undervalue these because of awareness? Is it because we can't measure them? Is it because we get lost chasing this version of the game? I mean, what a little bit of everything. What's the biggest disconnect, do you think, for coaches here?
I think you've mentioned a lot of them. I mean, in this country, we split friendships up, and I think we talked about this, that because in education terms, they go from September to June. Therefore, the birthdays, if they're born from July until June, they're in a year group. But actually, our football breaks it up because it's year of birth. And therefore, our friends who are in the same school of class are automatically split up. But it's more, it's not the focus. The focus is get on the pitch and help them develop. Those how-to skills are things that we don't forget it. We don't even get into. So how important is it to do the team building activities? How important is it when a new player comes to the club that they're not just thrown into the club, that there's a bit of getting to know you or explaining to the parents even why you do what you do, or integration from one team within a club to another. There's things that in educational terms, if you looked at it and said, there's scaffolding that's used in education, but we don't have it within a club. And maybe, you're obviously a director level, that's for you to do, to have those how-to skills and have a real focus in the club. I think you mentioned at the very start about culture. All of what you've talked about comes under culture because we want to build a culture, but an individual um, coached by their behaviors will set that culture. The parents in the sideline influence that culture. The league and the way they run the league influences that culture. At a club level, the director will look to do that. But how many times have you ever seen someone put a document together that says, here's a document about our culture. Here's the three, four things we do to build culture within our club. We talk about it, but actually is it written down anywhere so people know my behaviors as a coach are what they are because it's influenced by our culture?
Yes, yes. Staying on the kids and the social connection, and you've intentionally centered kids' voices, children's voices in the study. What were some takeaways that, like, for you jumped out, or that we would miss as adults that we wouldn't have thought of?
Do you know that it was really hard to read some of the kids' responses in times, which were, I feel pressured. I left the game because my coach shouted so much. But then on the other side, it was, I've had the best time of my life because of football. So it was one extreme to the other. There's very few in the middle says, yeah, I like football. It was one extreme or the other. And those small things that you wouldn't have thought of that I love the 5 minutes before the training starts where I get to play with my friend. Or my coach is great because when we score a goal, he lets me do a handstand. Those simple things that you think they're not part of football, but actually, if a coach stops that child from celebrating a goal, how much of an impact has that had them compared to the coach who really encourages them to celebrate that goal?
Mm, very powerful. Very powerful. Last few for you. You used outcome based accountability. And again, culturally in the US, where league structure is such a big piece, and that, again, poured onto a winning versus development tension doesn't help. How do you feel that a club in this culture could actually have outcome based accountability that doesn't start going into winning league record positioning, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, it does look at if we're looking at the child at the first stage, then we're saying what's their development. So, is it about the minutes they play? Well, we want to have fair minutes. So, if I'm playing in a game and I'm always starting my best team, and then I'm looking at my subs bench and saying, oh, will I put them on? Will I not? Well, we change it round, I guess, very Americanized, and we don't call them subs anymore. We call them game changers. And we will change the starting lineup quite regularly. So, it's not always the same people playing. But will that happen when you get to 16, 17? Probably reduces at maybe up to the age of 10. We've got equal game time. When they hit 11, 12, 13, now it's fair game time where everybody has to get at least 50% of the game and we change around who's starting. So those are the sorts of things you look at, and even in terms of pure numbers. Then in terms of the player's development, it's how many people get into the first team over a couple of years' time, how many people keep coming back. So if I'm at a club and I'm saying, oh, what percentage of my players have left the under 12s to go to the under 13s? If that's 20%, that's a very scary number that 80% have dropped out. Now, that could be for two reasons. They've dropped out, or else the club have brought other players in who they believe are better. So then it's a cultural piece of, do we want these kids to have lifelong involvement in sport? Do we want them to have lifelong involvement in our club? Or are we a performance team that just keeps changing over and over?
Yes, yes. Tough questions that need to be. I mean, how often would you say directors, coaches need to be sitting down and kind of reflecting on those points?
I think the reflective piece is one where we almost need to teach coaches how to reflect. We need to teach parents how to reflect. So can we get to a point where parents think before the game, how did I create an environment to help my son or daughter during the game? Did I contribute positively or negative to that environment after the game? And a coach the same thing, rather than think we lost that game, therefore what do I change? We won that game, what went well? It's actually reflecting on the bigger picture as opposed to the result.
Fantastic. Last one. If you could give one piece of advice to coaches, leaders to apply this research and this information starting tomorrow morning, what would it be?
Understand yourself and your players and your team and your club. So if you, because again, a lot of people have said to me, oh, I do this as a coach, I'm player centered, but my club's not. It's like, well, why you at the club? Would you bring your own son or daughter to that club? So somebody said to me recently, I want to be at a club and I want to be a coach that I would want my kids to go to in the future. So if we can get to that point, we need to understand ourselves as a coach. We need to understand the club, but we also need to understand the players that are with us, that we can then adopt our abilities to them.
What a way to finish it. Dr. Kyle Ferguson, outstanding. Thank you so much. Great stuff on the report. We'll share that on the study. Congratulations on getting this work out and trying to impact an area that really needs help, support, and impact.
Brilliant. Thanks, Gary. I appreciate it.